The current crisis brings massive changes to our lives. One might be emergence of neo-feudalism. In an earlier video, I talked about mega corporations and the reasons why these companies are not taking over power like promised by classic dystopian cyberpunk science fiction. We came to the conclusion that companies or organized crime might be forced to take over power if the states that dwell in crash down and state entities have to step in to protect their interests, therefore making themselves the face of power, where new subjects then start to hold them responsible, an expensive responsibility, which state companies used to avoid. Companies and other private interest groups usually seek a third way, that is using their influence to get the state to do things they like, but keep the state as a straw man through dirty tricks. However, the future necessities might weaken the state enough to force companies and special interest groups to pick up responsibilities, at least towards their employees and dependents. We will see if this might lead to neo-feudalism. The current crisis has weakened the nation state, and it's doubtful whether Western nations can still deliver on the manifold tasks the Western welfare state has took on. The state has to maintain infrastructure, provide schooling and welfare, healthcare and a stable currency, to name only a few of its many tasks. All these things cost a lot of money the state soon won't be able to extract from crumbling economies by taxation or inflation. The actual reason for this video was an announcement by my employer to provide private tuition for the employees' children. Since most employees have children that have to be homeschooled, which prevents them from concentrating on work. The schools in my area have been closed since March 2020. Obviously, the company does not want to pay for this because it is just an expense that did not incur 1 year ago. However, they had to pay because the state, although still collecting taxes, does not provide for schooling anymore, therefore impacting the productivity of the company's workforce. There is a major difference between public schooling and such company schooling. The former is in general open to everyone living in the territory of state, the latter, however, only to employees of state company. We are used to thinking of our relationship to the state by territory and citizenship. We obey the state on whose shores we put our feet on, and we demand public services based on our geographic position and maybe on our citizenship. The flip side of this coin is that we generally do not interact with states that we are not in, or whose citizenship or residence permit we do not have. These relationships are somewhat general and impersonal. Our modern understanding defines the state as an abstract being that floats above us, which makes it so effective yet terrifying. The Leviathan, this channel's namesake, is a big whale hovering above plankton that are the individual citizens. This is different from the many little fish, big and small, living in a huge swarm, which characterizes feudalism. Feudal states, however, feature exactly these personal bounds between individuals, not an abstract understanding of a state to whom everybody has to obey because you are in its territory or are its citizen. People back then did not think, I am an Englishman because I'm living in London under the law and rule of Her Majesty the Queen, and have an English citizenship, or I am a Frenchman because I'm living in Paris under the laws of the French Republic. The concept of citizenship or state didn't even exist back then, obviously, like the French Republic too. Medieval people saw their life as being a set of memberships and relationships, like we perhaps understand our personal relationships and social club memberships today. A farmer in a medieval European village saw himself as a serf to a local lord to whom he addressed his needs and who granted him protection in return. In the very same village, the local priest saw himself as a subordinate to the local bishop to whom he addressed his personal needs. The bishop in return had to care for the priest's well-being. Said priest did not address the local lord with his needs, nor expected the local lord obedience from the priest. Nobody of his people would have thought of himself as being a citizen of a nation and a direct subordinate to the king or whoever might be the head of state. The king was to most people back then more akin to a mythical being, whom the power to heal was ascribed when an actual human. These people did not have the concept of citizenship or having a head of state at all. These relationships were indeed more close to individual contracts than to any kind of administrative or constitutional law we have today to describe our relationship with the modern state. These contracts and relationships had different names like loan, fief, vassalage, or feud. For sake of clarity, I will still call them contract or relationship. Perhaps our aforementioned priest was the son of, say, a local farmer who joined the church after training in a church-owned school. With joining the ranks of the church, he basically switched his master like we switch the membership of one gym to another nowadays. Usually, a member of society, especially when he had some status, had more than one personal relationship. Let's assume that said farmer had another son who didn't want to work for a local lord. Therefore, he decided to go to a city to live there instead. With becoming a citizen, worker of said city, he entered a new personal relation, distinct from the ones his farmer father and priest brother have held. Imagine that he is a skilled artisan and has been able to start as an apprentice with a local smith. He now entered a distinct second relationship. He is, as a burgher, member of the town on the one hand, as a smith's apprentice, member of a local smith's guild on the other hand. Now imagine that he is especially successful in his trade. The king recognizes his skills and grants him the right to take some wood for his furnace from a local forest that is owned by the king. The smith maybe has to give the king 5 swords in return every year. This adds a third relationship to this list. Most importantly, these relationships could not be characterized as public nor private. Well, now imagine that our successful smith had a son. If his smith dies, it has to be checked for every of these relationships if his son inherits them and which conditions apply to the inheritance. Maybe the king's grant is only granted to the smith in persona and is lost by the smith's death. After all, the king just wanted his good swords and not those of anybody else. But maybe he is willing to renew his contract with his son if he turns out to be as talented as his father. The membership of the guild depends on whether the smith's son is a trained smith as well. If he assumes that the son has not yet apprenticed as a smith, he cannot become a member of the guild, maybe even has to hand over the forge to another smith deemed qualified enough. Perhaps, however, he becomes a burgher of the city because he meets the requirement of having real estate within the city walls. Moreover, if any dispute within one of these relationships appear, there is no neutral general court you can go to by default, no codified law one can fall back to. Every relationship is essentially a standalone version with embedded procedures and laws. This obviously made settling of conflicts and changing existing structures an increasingly difficult task. Remember that the modern nation-state just needs to pass legislation to literally do anything within the borders of reason. Nowadays we distinguish between public law and private contracts. You are subject to the laws of a nation by virtue of stepping within its borders, without having to close any contract with a local city or local lord. Vice versa, you can be sure that the laws of other nations do not apply. Any contract you close is private in nature and subject to the laws of the nation you are in and can be settled in state courts under the guidance of the law. This separation between the public space and the private space marks the difference between the medieval society, you can hardly name the system a medieval state, and the modern nation state. On a side note, it is wrong to say that one system is superior to another. These systems are to be judged under the specific challenges humans and rulers had to face when they were created. The feudal state was a response to the collapse of the Roman Empire, which was somewhat close to a modern nation state. The modern state was a response to the sectarian wars that teared through the medieval fabric after the Reformation and the general economic collapse of medieval society. The separation between public and private space allowed different religious groups to live with each another and lightened the complicated, often hardly fair systems of individual relationship, which however continued to exist till the 19th century. The neo-feudal system therefore is a response to the modern nation-state, which cannot keep up with welfare and the many functions modern states have to perform. Private actors have to step in where the state cannot act anymore, like local lords. The church had to step in for the failing Roman Empire. Schooling is a prime example. Since public schools collapse, companies and religious groups have to take over the burden, making schools available for their members. People will start to identify themselves more and more as members of certain groups than as citizens of a failing state. There are pros and cons to this development. On the one hand, in the long run we will see lower taxes since the nation-state fades away. People indeed embraced the end of the Western Roman Empire because they had to pay significantly less taxes to the local lord than to Rome. This offers opportunity to those willing to take a risk in uncertain times. On the other hand, however, people start to become more and more dependent to the groups they are members of. Switching your employer will become a life-changing event like migrating to another country today. Not only your work does change, but everything else like schooling, housing, welfare, etc. switches as well. There is no legal oversight on those entities, especially the lower class will fall prey to basically enslavement in the long run. Moreover, the ever-increasing system of individual relationships will make it difficult to react to social change and external threats. This creeping development ultimately killed medieval feudalism. The upper class, like the medieval nobility, will stay afloat with dozens different relationships towards different rulers, companies and religious groups. The lower class will be absorbed by the group they end up in, for better or worse. The rise of neo-feudalism might give rise to new great cities, which could look like the megacities of Judge Dredd or the hive cities of Warhammer 40k. There is a reason that these cities like Necromunda have a feudal organization. Organized crime also has a feudal organization, since every mobster is personally connected to a local leader who is indebted to his master, so on and so forth. Comment if you are interested in videos about these topics. In another upcoming video I will talk about the reasons why Tesla endorses and acquires Bitcoin. Tesla did not only endorse Bitcoin but actively participates in the software development surrounding Bitcoin. This is another example of a private company taking over tasks of the state, but not voluntarily but out of necessity. Because the survival of state-issued fiat currency is at least doubtful. Last but not least, we will see a resurgence of domestic servants that accompany the rise of neo-feudalism, topic of another video in my pipeline. Obviously, things might develop in a totally different direction. Current challenges surely have more than one possible solution. Neo-feudalism is a path rarely discussed, hence this video. Thank you for watching. As always, you are honoring and humbling me in my work with watching this video, let alone watching it to the end. On this channel I want to discuss the mechanisms that run the greatest machine known to mankind, the state. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more.